Good evening. Hello, everyone. Please come on in and take your seats to everyone outside. We'll start in just a minute or two. Okay, great. Good evening. My name is Elizabeth Rohrbach. I am the board chair of Womentum, and I'm so happy to be here tonight. I was reminiscing about the last time I was on this stage, and it was with a few of you I see out there. It was this past fall at Womentum's Leadership Summit, and we were on this stage trying to hoop dance with the world champion hoop dancer, Jasmine Pinkner-Bell. And it was magical, and it was wildly embarrassing as well, but something I'll never forget. So thank you for joining us tonight. I don't think we'll be dancing, but it's gonna be magical for sure. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our first ever March Onward, a celebration of women event. To begin, I would like to thank our business sponsors, the Equipoise Fund, Hughes Charitable Foundation, and Wells Fargo. Also, thank you to the Center for the Arts. I would like to recognize those of you in the crowd who are part of businesses who support our Leadership Summit every fall. It's a large undertaking, and we're very grateful. Thank you also to our fellow board members who are here, Stephanie Brennan, Leslie Hardy, I think Augusta Friendsmith might be here, as well as our executive director, Sam Eddy. She is quite under the weather, but she's here leading us still, so thank you. As many of you know, March is Women's History Month, and tomorrow is International Women's Day. It's a global day to celebrate the social, economic, cultural, and political achievements of women. So we're especially excited to bring you some extraordinary Jackson Hole women who have taken their passions and their skills nationally and internationally. Womentum is a 501c3 nonprofit, and our mission is to inspire and connect women to thrive as leaders. So now I ask you to silence your phone, please, and I will turn the mic over to our facilitator, Ingrid Daffner Krasnow.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I'm not actually sure if I'm speaking on this mic or my lapel mic, but we'll just see what happens. So I have to just say before I get started, I'm not going to point her out, but not only is tomorrow International Women's Day, but tomorrow is actually my daughter Talia's 12th birthday. So anytime I've had an opportunity to embarrass her on her birthday, I have, so I felt like I needed to just continue that tradition. So Talia, happy birthday. So I am really honored to be here tonight with this incredible panel of women. Crista and Kate and Nona are going to share just a little bit of their individual journeys so that we can learn from their experiences and maybe even see ourselves in them. As a way to get this evening of storytelling started, I just wanted to share how I even ended up on this stage with this panel. So like many of you, I was really moved at this past Leadership Summit, the same one that Elizabeth referred to, when Bonnie Wan shared how she created the life brief. And for those of you who may not have been at the summit, you really missed out. Come next year. But she conveyed how she used her professional expertise as an advertiser and developing creative briefs to design what she ended up calling the life brief, which was a tool that could help herself and others ask and answer this question, what do I want? So I was really inspired by the brief itself, but also the way that Bonnie talked about her process. was also really inspired that she was able to give her whole presentation with no notes and wearing high heels. So the next time I'm on the stage, that's my plan. So when I met with Sam a few weeks later, I shared with her just how much Bonnie's talk meant to me, both in the content itself and in the execution. And I was literally gushing to her at Persephone West Bank. I want to do what Bonnie does. I want a job where I can tell stories that make an impact, that help people see what is possible. And so this isn't such a far cry from what I already do. If you looked me up on LinkedIn, you'd see I call myself a strategic communications consultant, which is really just a boring way to say I teach people about storytelling. And it's because for me, words hold such incredible power. And for anyone who may have been here last Friday night for the Moth, you know what I'm talking about, that the art of storytelling reveals the heart of the storyteller, which is why I'm so excited to hear these stories. So I love telling people or teaching people about the mechanics of message development and media relations and audience segmentation, but I also wanted to tell the stories. And so when I shared this with Sam, if you know Sam, her response was no surprise. She said, "That's amazing. Let's figure out how to make this happen." And so my hunch is that Sam has had really similar conversations with many of you in the audience and many of the participants in the Womentoring program and in Womentum on the whole in this community. So I just want to take a moment and just say thank you to Sam for all that you do for Womentum and for our community. So fast forward to when Sam's vision for this March Onward event started taking shape. It was sometime in January, and she reached out to me, and she asked if I would be interested in moderating a panel of 3 of Jackson's many interesting professionals. She said, "I want them to tell their stories, but I'd love it if you could help frame the evening so that our audience gets to thinking, because they did something that they believe in, we can too." So that's your job. So I was thrilled to work with these women and of course said yes. And over the course of the last few weeks, I've had an incredible pleasure of speaking with each of them one-on-one to capture their stories, or just not their stories, but like the essence of what they're going to share with you, just a moment in time. And I already admired these ladies a lot before we got here, but I have to say I've already become an even bigger fan just in the last few days. So thank you each for everything that you all are doing here in Jackson and at the national level and internationally. So one of the things that I thought was so interesting about hearing from each of them was that there were some common threads, and you'll hear these in what they share with you tonight, and you'll hear some differences. But what I wanted to do was just highlight some of the common threads about their experiences, again, so that maybe we can see ourselves in them, maybe we can learn something from what they've gone through so far. So one of the things I learned was that there was at least one or multiple pivotal experiences in their lives that gave them a sense of purpose and future direction. And they were paying enough attention to know, that seemed like it was meaningful. Maybe they knew in the moment, maybe it was when they were looking back on it, but there was like a pivotal moment for them. That they've each taken some really big chances on the people around them, but also on themselves. That they have gone after it, whatever the it is for them. At the same time, not knowing what might come next. And that they each have some version of what I'll call an inner voice that has helped guide them along the way. And sometimes, it seems, the biggest challenge for them was just to listen to it. So as we hear from our speakers, we encourage you also to reflect on how their stories may align with some of your own experiences. And as a tool to help you get thinking, both tonight and moving forward, we've posed a few guiding questions on the bookmarks that you all received when you came in. And I just also want to thank Womentum staff member Melissa Cassett for designing those. She's also not here tonight due to illness, but she is an incredible contributor to everything that Womentum does. We assume that you'll have questions as the evening goes on. So if you have questions, we're trying something new. We're hoping you'll do this experiment with us. We are inviting you to send your questions via text message that we will be collecting and curating, and then we'll have an open Q&A at the end with all of those questions. So you should have been seeing the number rotating on the screen. It should be on the bookmark that you received, but if you want to hear it also, the number is 307-203-3390. And that's just for these questions. So if you send something to that, don't worry that you're sending it to someone random. So if you'd please join me in giving a warm welcome to Crista Valentino and Kate Schelbe and Nona Yehia.
No, thanks. There we go. Hi. So as Ingrid said, you're usually advised that if you want to tell of your impact, that you should tell a story. Well, Coalition Wild's greatest success story might be a story of my own. It's the story of a 26-year-old girl who wanted to matter and wanted her voice to matter. It's a story of that same girl saying yes, and then having to figure out how to grow up along with her dreams. It's a story of showing up, and like a lot of stories, it's a story of letting go. In 2013, I was working at the Murie Center in Grand Teton National Park, and I cared about the planet, but quite honestly didn't really believe I had any real influence over what happened to it or what happened on it. And overall, I was kind of lost and feeling like I lacked some real purpose. But we were holding this event, and I met a man named Vance Martin. Vance was the president of the Wild Foundation and the founder of the World Wilderness Congresses. And Vance and I got to talking, and he was telling me about these global gatherings that he would bring together thousands of environmental professionals from around the world. And about 20 minutes into the conversation, he turned to me and said, would you be interested in creating a youth delegation for this conference? In his words, there were too many gray hairs in the room, and he wanted to give young people a platform to be engaged and tell their stories and have a voice. And so I shrugged and said, yeah, sure. And then I went to the bathroom to Google what a youth delegation meant and what a World Wilderness Congress was. But fast forward 3 months, and I was in Salamanca, Spain, at the 10th World Wilderness Congress with this newly formed youth delegation, fully pretending like I knew what I was doing and that I should be there. And in these conversations with many of my new friends, I realized that this issue wasn't just an isolated incident, that young people across the environmental sector lacked a platform to be engaged and have a voice and tell their stories. And so rather than this just being a one-off delegation at one event, at one conference, Coalition Wild was born. And when I was asked if we wanted to launch this new organization at the closing ceremony in front of 5,000 people, I shrugged and I was like, yeah, sure. And then I went to the bathroom and freaked out. But this moment on stage was the first time in my life that I felt like I mattered, like I felt like my voice mattered and that I was part of something bigger than myself. And it was that feeling that really lit me up. And I continued to chase it for 9 years. What I learned, it was that starting an organization is actually really, really easy. But creating something that is relevant and viable and enduring is not. And so Coalition Wild really started out as this global movement of youth voices for the environment, really advocating for the engagement and a space for young people to be involved in decision-making about the planet. And I found myself quite quickly being brought into these decision-making rooms where I was with leaders from our country, from other countries, people often wearing suits and ties, and they were agreeing with me. They saw the value of engaging the next generation in conversations about the environment. And they asked me if I had any people or young people that I could recommend to sit in these advisory roles. And when I looked at many of the hundreds of young people who had joined Coalition Wild from the beginning, I realized that people were really passionate, engaged, and they cared, but they lacked the skills and the experience and the knowledge to really be effective in those positions. And it was on that recognition that I shifted Coalition Wild from being a movement-building organization to being a capacity-building organization, one that really tangibly worked to provide the opportunity to build skills, build capacity, receive knowledge, build networks, get mentorship in order to support youth-led conservation action on the ground. And it was just in time, because in 2015, I received an email from a young man named Augustin. He's on your left. Augustin was 30 years old, grew up in Haiti, and he was super passionate about conservation and the environment, but after growing up exposed to some of the worst natural disasters that our world has ever seen, he was left feeling pretty hopeless. But he had this vision of bringing environmental education to schools across his country, and in the process, putting in place gardens so that he could reconnect children with nature while also tackling the mass food insecurity that many of them faced. But he didn't know where to begin, and quite honestly, neither did I. I didn't know anything about Haiti, about teaching environmental education, let alone to rural schools. And I didn't know how to support somebody who has experienced such hardship. But Augustin asked me if I would help him, and I kind of shrugged and was like, yeah, sure. And so over the next 6 months, we figured it out together. What I learned was that I didn't have to have all of those answers. What I needed to do was to show up week after week and to remind him that he wasn't alone, that I believed in him, and that he was far more capable than any of those unknowns or any of the fears that he might have. Augustin went on to educate over 250 students that year. And I just checked in with him last week as I was preparing for this, and he is still leading environmental projects on a much larger scale for Haiti to this day. And it was because of Augustin that I started the Coalition Wild Accelerator Program, which is an online, free, accessible training program for young people to equip them with the skills, the knowledge, the networks, and the mentorship to lead conservation projects in their communities on a topic that they are passionate about. And that program has currently equipped over 3,000 youth from over 100 countries to lead environmental projects, and that's 3,000 new projects taking place for the planet on the ground today. And I realized that in each of the young people that I got to know through that process, the young people I got to work with and learn from, that I got to see expand far beyond what they thought their potential was, that every time I found my purpose. And I realized that a lot of the trainings and the skills that we were teaching these young people were the same skills that I myself needed. And so if Coalition Wild was going to grow and be successful, that I needed to figure out a way to grow alongside with it. And so in early 2015, I was just wrapping up being a mentee in Womentum's program. And this as many of you I'm sure know, it was such an influential, impactful program in my life. And I started thinking of how influential and impactful it could be to emerging leaders around the world. And so I had this vision of this global mentorship program where we would pair emerging conservation leaders with veterans in the field, and how great that would be. But I couldn't get it off the ground. We were just too young. I didn't have the global or professional networks to attract mentors, and I couldn't convince any donors to fund such a fledgling organization. So I stopped fighting it, I put it on the shelf and forgot about it. Until in early 2016, I received a phone call. It was from the United States Department of Interior. And they were calling because they wanted to partner with a youth-led environmental organization, because then Secretary of the Interior, Sally Jewell, wanted to create a mentorship program. Oh, and it needed to be ready in 3 months, because we wanted to launch it at the World Conservation Congress with a big press conference and a big event for signing of an MOU, official partnership agreement between myself and Secretary Jewell. Would I be interested in collaborating? And I mustered every ounce of gumption I had to stammer out like a very confident, yeah, totally, we can totally do that. And there I was, 3 months later, standing next to this badass woman, signing my name to a document that had essentially been a failure a couple of months earlier. Our global mentorship program has since evolved to pair over 450 participants from over 80 countries. And I can continue going on of like how many of our programs were built and the impacts that we've had and the stories and the things I've learned from many of the young people that I've gotten to work with. But often those lessons were the same. Say yes, and then work like hell to figure out how to make it happen. And that I don't have to have all of the answers. I just needed to start by showing up. But maybe the greatest lesson that I learned from Coalition Wild might have been the last one. So I believed when I started the organization, and I still believe today, that projects and organizations should be developed and led by the demographic that they are intending to help. And so I had been this advocate for intergenerational leadership and the importance of valuing youth and youth voices. And so if I was going to be this true advocate, then I needed to be the example. And the catch is that Coalition Wild works with people under 35. And so I made the decision that when I turned 35, I would step down, because the true test of the efficacy of Coalition Wild's theory of change would be my own irrelevance. And let me tell you, succession planning is really hard, and considering your own insignificance is a deeply, deeply humbling practice. But that became my job, was to create a space that allowed the next generation of Coalition Wild's leadership to take over. So for the next 2 years, I took everything I had learned from growing this global mentorship program, and I mentored a young 26-year-old Filipina woman, Yem Perico, she's in the bottom center, to take my spot. I took the best teachings from all of our trainings, all of my tips and tricks. I opened up my network of names, and I passed it along to her. I had to often admit to her and to myself that I didn't really have a plan or rarely had a strategy, that mostly I said yes, I showed up, and I trusted in myself to be able to figure out how to make it happen. And I told her that she just had to say yes and to show up, and that I promised her that I would be there to help her to figure out how to make it happen. But mostly, what I told her was that she had to build a community around her, a community that she could lean on, that she could learn from, that was there to remind her how capable she was in the moments when she might have forgotten. I told her to bring in people that she admired, people who were just a little bit further along than her, or maybe more experienced than her, because they would force her to grow far beyond the confines of her own perceived limitations. Because really, that's what Coalition Wild was doing from the beginning, for myself and for the thousands of young people who joined our family over the years. We created a safe space where it was okay to try, even if you didn't really know what you were doing. We created a space where your voice wasn't just a token. Your voice had power, and with that power, it allowed you to design a future that you wanted to be a part of. And maybe most importantly, it was a space where you could find out who you were by following the thing that lit you up. Because in following your heart, in following that thing that lights you up, in doing that work, that's really where you find out how you matter. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your words. Good evening, my name is Kate Schelbe, and it is an honor to share the stage with these amazing, inspiring women. I am going to talk about my personal story, which I don't share all that often. Many of you hear me talk about my work with Girls Education International, but you'll get a deeper dive into who I am and why it is I do what I do. On April 12th, 2014, I received a phone call that changed my life. My roommate and dear friend of 4.5 years was reported missing while on a mission trip in Nicaragua. Her body was found a few days later. For those of you who knew Karen, you knew her ear-to-ear grin. You knew her love of multi-sport adventure days and her tendency to arrive to dinner party late with the appetizer only to be served as the dessert. Karen's death was violent, and the trauma of that death often was difficult for me to overlook and difficult for me to focus on the positive aspects and the positive impact she had on her world here in this community. But I did so with the help of my friends and family. Being in this community in the wake of her death was incredibly important to me. To be in the mountains and the landscape that have been the foundation for our friendship, to be surrounded by my friends, my mentors, my therapists, all of the people who had supported me and had known Karen. And it was a really difficult time, and I received unwavering love and support from my friends and family from afar as well. When Karen died, I was a classroom teacher at Journey School, now Mountain Academy, but education had always been a part of my life. As a small child, I played school with my neighbors using the chalkboard in my basement. As a high schooler, I did an independent study with a beloved history teacher where I studied teaching students, even though I was a high school student. Shows you the level of nerd that I am. In college, I volunteered in an elementary school. My first professional job was with Teton Literacy back in 2006, and I taught ESL. And then I transitioned to work at Journeys, and during my tenure there, I transitioned from a classroom teacher to become the director of the middle school. And that transition was hard for me, thinking about how do you step away from the classroom and take on administrative roles. I had a conversation with a mentor about that, and this is an educator who I'd really looked up to and admired. And I have watched her take a step away from the classroom as well. She went on to work at the Lawrence Hall of Science, where she taught teachers as well as developed curriculum. And one thing that she said in her explanation was that she wanted to increase her impact. And so by leaving the classroom and teaching teachers, she could expand her sphere of influence. And that conversation with a mentor really inspired me to think about what is my impact in this world, and how can I expand those ripple effects to have a larger impact. And I learned a lot of things about myself from Karen's death and from her life. And one of the things that kept surfacing for me is this urgency of life is short. And so I wanted to pursue some things that were on my bucket list. Growing up, I was surrounded with artifacts from Africa. My maternal grandmother, pictured here, and my maternal grandfather spent some time in East Africa in the 1960s. And then my grandmother took my mom to Africa, specifically Kenya and Tanzania in the 90s. And so I grew up with these artifacts in my house, pictures, stories, even the smell and some of the jewelry held. And I really felt drawn to the continent, even though I had never been there. And so thinking about this urgency and this desire to increase my impact and this need for change and figuring out what my purpose was, I needed to change. And so I had a conversation with my parents, and they'll tell you a different version of it, but you get to hear my version of it tonight, where I asked my parents if they would go to Africa with me, that I wanted to share that experience with them. And I had traveled independently a lot, internationally by myself. And upon Karen's death, I was terrified to travel. I was scared to leave this country. My sense of safety was compromised. And I just had a high level of trauma that I was still processing. And so for me, it was this matter of who can I feel safe with? Who can I feel protected with? Who can I share this experience with? And I'm fortunate to have a very loving and supportive family. And so my parents said yes. and we started planning this trip. So it was crossing this thing off my bucket list. It was spending time with my parents. I have way too many friends who have lost parents already, and so really wanting to make sure that I get this trip of a lifetime in with my parents while they're able to. I knew I was going to have to face some fears of traveling again, face some fears of being outside the bubble of Jackson that feels so safe, and process grief, and really wrestle with that in a different way. And similar to my way of growing up and having a sense of service instilled in me, that was definitely reinforced during my tenure at the science schools. I wanted to make sure that I had an opportunity to apply my skills and give back to the places that I was going. And so in that way, I was connected with Dr. Ray Farrelly, who's the former executive director of Girls Education International. And with that, definitely learned that it was going to be a perfect fit where I would be able to apply my skills as a classroom teacher as well as a school administrator in this setting and have an impact on a school and an organization in Western Tanzania in a very rural area. So I did the most logical thing that I could think of, and I quit my very stable job, and I went to Africa. And I lived with his family. This was my home, including the dog that I accidentally rescued. And I lived in a rural area, no running water, no electricity. I did not speak Swahili, nor did I speak the local language Kiha. And I was completely out of my element. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, and by far the most rewarding. And during that time when I was, wrong button. During that time when I was in Tanzania volunteering with Girls Education International, we conducted 35 home visits. And this was an opportunity for me to get an orientation around the students, around the families, around the communities that we were serving, and to be able to see the impact that Girls Ed was having at the ground level. Here I am with my colleagues, Lucas and Madaga, who are just phenomenal advocates for girls' education, talking to a father and three of his daughters, two of whom are Girls Ed recipients, and really just hearing their stories. And every home visit that we went to, we were received with incredible hospitality, except for one family. And that's how I met Ramence. Ramence is the young woman in the bottom kneeling, and Ramence is an orphan. Her parents died from HIV/AIDS, and she ended up living with her aunt and her grandmother, neither of whom had received a formal education, both of whom believed that girls were better at home, doing domestic chores and helping out with a small agricultural plot that they had. And so she did not have any family support in her pursuit of education. When I met Ramence, 6 out of the 10 reasons that UNICEF reports of the top 10 reasons that girls are kept away from school were present in her life. But she is resilient, she is a chatterbox, she will talk your ear off, she is optimistic, and she loves to learn. During that conversation, I learned a lot about Ramence, about her passion for school, about her desire to stay educated, to be educated. I also learned that she was unable to meet the school's dress code policy because she could not afford a pair of shoes. Those hardships were hard to process, and yet with Girls Education International's help, I am very happy to report that Ramence is in university right now. So Ramence is currently studying, she's pursuing a degree in education and science with a plan of becoming a secondary educator, teaching biology. That's her dream. And Ramence is just one of the stories. Our students go on to become pharmacists, to become electrical engineers, to become secretaries, to become small business owners. And being able to see all of the benefits of educating a girl is really what motivates me to continue to do what I'm doing. My time in Tanzania was really eye-opening. I saw firsthand a lot of hardships. At the school where I was working, Amhara Secondary School, the infrastructure of the school did not meet the World Health Organization's guidelines for sanitation. At the time, there were 500 students and only 4 latrines. there were not sufficient tables and chairs, so I taught a classroom of 96 students, and I learned all of their names. None of the names I had ever heard before, so that was a challenge. And in a classroom of 96 students, there were not enough tables and chairs, and in fact, at the school, there were some classrooms that were not furnished at all. I also had the awful circumstance of teaching and then literally hearing in the classroom beside me a colleague using corporal punishment against his students as a way of disciplining them. It was atrocious. And I thought back to this quote that I learned when I was a child that has really resonated with me from John Wesley, and this idea of do all the good you can by all the means you can. And I continued to be inspired by that. And my task there was to teach, and yet I really saw that I could do more and felt inspired to do so. So I conducted a fundraiser while I was in rural Tanzania. Again, very limited internet connection. And with the help of many generous donors, many from this community, was able to fund an additional 11 pit toilets, including a septic tank, to bring the infrastructure of the school up to the World Health Organization's guidelines for sanitation. Did a fundraiser to ensure that the classrooms were furnished with an additional 320 tables and chairs. And I also implemented 2 different trainings using curriculum that was written by Ugandans for other Africans about the importance of using positive discipline instead of corporal punishment. And these were just incredible experiences for me, and yet it also felt like a drop in the bucket. My time in Tanzania really allowed me to focus on the basics, to focus on securing food for that day, filtering my own water, very simple shelters. I did not look in a mirror for 6 months. And if you take that away from your life, you end up having more time. It's really, really remarkable, but you lose time when you have to walk a half hour to get to water that you still have to filter so that it's safe to drink. And during this time, I was really hoping to have a break from grief, to be able to process it without additional inputs. And yet, in my 6 months in Tanzania, I attended more funerals than I ever had in my entire life, including that of infants that had died either during childbirth or shortly thereafter. And the lesson that I learned there is that the trauma that you experience, the emotions that you have, travel with you regardless as to your geographic location. But I also saw the best of humanity. I saw the ingenuity of children and adults in the village, whether it was coming up with innovative ways of using mosquito netting or designing different games. I was gifted a live chicken, and I'm a vegetarian. I didn't really know what to do with this live chicken, and yet annual salary for the community members where I was is less than $100 a year. And the cost of a live chicken is the equivalent of $8. So the fact that I was given a live chicken, that financial token, had such significance to me. And really seeing the generosity of the spirit, of the human spirit, and the sense of community, whether that's caring for each other, whether that's helping each other build a structure or harvest each other's crops, sharing that load, really just inspiring. That made coming back to the US really hard. Coming back to the US lacked meaning for me. Everything felt very easy, and reverse culture shock is real, and it was a rough transition. You are welcome to talk to my sisters to hear more about how that transition was hard for me. But it was really important to me, similar to right after Karen died, to be in this community, in these mountains. It was really important when I came back from Africa to be with my family. I really felt the drive to be there, and specifically to be in driving distance of my sisters, one in North Carolina, one in Florida. So I moved to North Carolina and was there in perfect timing. Shortly after being there, my sister gave birth to my nephew, who was my favorite human, and was just really delightful to be able to be involved in his life. But I really struggled with purpose and place. and feeling like life after being in this incredibly intense area in Tanzania, life here just lacked meaning in a lot of ways. And I did not feel connected to the community where I was in North Carolina. So I sought meaning in other ways. And so I ended up joining the board of directors of Girls Education International. And what we do is to support girls and young women's access to education in rural areas and remote parts of the world. And we do this by partnering with community-led organizations. So working at grassroots level, empowering communities to respond to the needs in their community. And whereas you folks have heard my story about Tanzania today, we also operate in Pakistan. So in Tanzania, our focus is in post-secondary education, and we do that by providing scholarships. To give you a sense of the money behind that, $1,500 covers the cost of one student for a year of university. That is a steal when you talk about the cost of education in the US. In Pakistan, we provide safe and reliable transportation for 60 students, the equivalent of grades in the US, grades 6 through 10, so that those young girls can get to school safely and not be victims to assault on a long walk to school. Girls Ed has a lot of different aspects to it. We work to increase access to education, to expand awareness about the work that we're doing, to engage communities on the ground, and to steward funds responsibly. And we do this all under the umbrella of operating sustainably. My work with Girls Education International, I am the executive director. It is a volunteer position. And I do all of the roles that a normal executive director would do. I'm just not paid for it. And I have a full-time, very meaningful, empowering job here in this community. And the balance is really hard to strike. But the message that I want to share with you folks is that we as individuals are responsible for how many pieces are in our pie. And we get to dictate what percentage we give to those. So yes, it's hard. Yes, I live a full and rich life, and I do that by design. My full-time job is at the Community Foundation of Jackson Hole, and this is a new position. I'm the backbone leader of the Teton Behavioral Health Alliance, and the work that we're doing in this community is to support the treatment, prevention, and crisis response systems of the behavioral health care landscape to better address the gaps and inequities that exist. And so I balance this in addition to my work with Girls Ed, and I take classes, and I'm a daughter and a friend and a sister and a dog mom and a mountain biker, and I'm sure that all of you in this room also wear many hats. And my message to you folks today is that yes, wearing all of those hats is hard, but as my dear friend reminded me this summer, I can do hard things. I am not a climber. This was terrifying for me. And in that moment when I was scared, the mantra that I had in my head was, I can do hard things. I've done hard things in the past. I survived Karen's death. I have lived in sub-Saharan Africa. We have all survived hard things. Your hard things are going to be different than mine, but you can do hard things as well. So my call to action for you folks tonight is to find the thing that you're passionate about. For me, it's girls' education. For you, it might be conservation, it might be housing, it can be anything. Find the thing that lights your soul on fire and do everything you can to feed that fire. And give generously of your time, your talents, and your treasures. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's so wonderful to see all your faces and to be up here with all of you. These stories, you're right, Ingrid, we have so much in common. There's so many themes that really work in tandem. I'll make sure that I have this under control. So I didn't set out to be a vertical farmer. My board hates it when I say that, but I feel really comfortable sharing that with all of you. I did set out to be an architect. Okay, That was after I thought I was going to be a marine biologist and swim with dolphins for the rest of my life. But in college, after failing oceanography, I stumbled across architecture, and this discovery was the most powerful one of my life. I believe that architecture is a very intense vehicle for change. We experience it every day. This is such an important piece of architecture for our community, but we don't think about how it affects every aspect of who we are and how it can reflect our values. From the outset, I understood that the buildings and systems, I'll get this under control, I promise, that the buildings and systems that make the fabric of our communities should be and can be designed to meet the challenges of the 21st century and serve all members of the 21st century society, especially those on the margins. I believe that sustainable communities are successful ones. So the question then becomes, how can you as individuals have an impact on your community and its future? So over the last 12 years, and really throughout my life, I've had the honor of working with an incredibly talented and passionate group of people who are committed to the idea that they too can be agents of change. In our work at Guide Architects and at Vertical Harvest, as designers, farmers, and innovators, we have collaborated to create a new type of civic infrastructure, one that utilizes food to solve multiple problems simultaneously. So through Vertical Harvest and at Vertical Harvest, we fervently believe that food is the strongest connection to human environmental health. And we know that food will be the defining issue of the 21st century. This is something that's important to all of this. Why? Because globally, there will be 9 billion people on the planet by 2050. We will need a 70% increase in calories to feed everyone, but we'll have a quarter of the arable land and a third less of water to do that with. And we'll have to do that, as we've seen, with daunting environmental challenges and increasing weather extremes. And climate change isn't just an environmental issue. It's a social justice issue, it's a public health issue, it's an economic resiliency issue, and it's a, did I say social justice? I think I did. And so we can address all of these through innovation at once. The way we currently grow and distribute food is not stable, resilient, or equitable. Food is a defining issue in our community here in Jackson as well. We have, at best, and we've seen it in this winter, a 4-month growing season. We import over 99% of our food, and in a bad snowstorm, we can't get food into our community. So our first farm, supported by many of you in this audience, started with a simple mandate: responsibly grow as much food as possible indoors and do it all year round. So we innovated the world's first 3-story greenhouse that grows over 10 acres of food on 1/10 of an acre that exists right down the street. But that wasn't enough. We asked ourselves, what other problems could we solve? Could we help people that live in our community? Could we help people who are looking for consistent, meaningful careers? Half of our workforce identifies with disabilities. So, before Vertical Harvest, our employees were bagging groceries, cleaning hotel rooms. Now, we all have to start somewhere, and we all have started somewhere. But now our farmers are not only contributing to you the most valuable commodity to any community, healthy, nutritious food, but they're leading the charge in the fastest growing industry in agriculture. This is why we became vertical farmers, to not only grow better food, but futures. And once we did it here and saw firsthand the impact that we could have, we set out to scale and replicate, designing and operating large-scale indoor farms around the country, where food becomes our medium for positive change. We've created a new, beautiful type of civic building, valued like a public library or a community center, one that's a reflection of a community's values and responsive to its needs. And we've seen how our farms can be a new type of infrastructure that embodies conscious and radical inclusion, eliciting voices of all to cultivate and reinforce a burgeoning and new industry. And we're just getting started. We plan to build 10 farms in the next 5 years in cities with food access challenges. We've established civic and partnerships in Westbrook, Maine, which was the farm that I showed you, Detroit, Chicago, and Las Vegas, to name a few. Our farm in Westbrook will create 2 million pounds of produce for the local community on only a half of an acre. We are reconnecting the farm to the urban center and are creating a new generation of unexpected farmers. So while the picture I was showing you before was pretty, here we are. The path to get here was not. It was never easy. It still isn't. We face multiple hurdles, and as all of you said, you have to show up. We face those hurdles often all at once. Innovation is always challenging. Many told us it wasn't possible to tackle our dual mission of food and futures. With patience, with commitment, with an amazing team, we did just that. And it's so rewarding to reflect back and to think about how many you can'ts we turned into we can. And we had more than our share of you can'ts. So let's go back. Why, now that you've heard the story of what we are, what's the why? Why go so big? I ask myself this pretty often, and when you find yourself asking yourself the same question over and over, where do you turn for answers? Well, the internet. So it was there that I learned about the Japanese secret for a long and meaningful life. I believe in Ikigai. Ikigai describes your purpose in life. The work that I do is who I am. It's where I've come from. It gives me the courage to be creative, to be bold, to innovate. My work aligns with my strengths, with my passions, and with the needs of the world. It turns out that Ikigai is in my blood. My grandfather was an entrepreneur. He started as a coffee boy at Mobil Oil and worked himself up to lead divisions in Africa and the Middle East. He eventually ended up owning his own franchise in Lebanon, and then a little small thing that lasted many years, the Civil War, started. His plant was blown up 3 times. Each time, with an incredible team, he rebuilt it. With grit, with determination, he kept the lights on for many people who needed it very badly during that time. My mother started her career as a sociologist. At that time, it was almost unheard of, but she traveled with the Ford Foundation, talking about the importance of the role of women in the Middle East. Nobody was talking about that. And then she had my brother. My brother was deprived of oxygen in utero, was born at 4 months, and then put in an oxygen tank and deprived of oxygen again. The first doctor that my mother took him to said he would never live past his first year. The second doctor said the same thing. And this is what turned my mom into an innovator. At the dawn of the computer age, she thought there had to be a better way than carrying around a box of health records from doctor to doctor to doctor. And this is where she innovated an electronic health record to work with behavioral and mental health systems, changing the world and the way we categorize people with disabilities and with mental health. Her first customer is Maine Health, and that is our first customer in the farm, first 2-scale farm that we're working with in Maine. It's amazing how these things come full circle. So, my brother was the catalyst for her, and it turns out for me as well. He's my life's greatest gift. I was an advocate before I even knew what the word meant. As immigrants, my parents wanted to give us the both of what this country could provide. And sadly, they couldn't offer him the same things they could offer me. When it came time for employment after schooling, it was like falling off a cliff for our family. That inequity is why I am here today. I never thought I'd be an entrepreneur like my mother and my grandfather before her, but my experiences drove me to this place. I am, above all, my mother's daughter. I am my brother's sister. My partner, Caroline Croft Este, reminds me of this all the time. I am Nabil's sister. She also carries the mantra with her, we can do hard things. Finding tools to make our world more equitable, architecture is a powerful vehicle for change, and with it, we are changing the world. So what does this story mean to you? And I love it that this is the same kind of slide that Crista ended on, and the way that Kate ended with community. What I can say is find your ikigai. Never veer from it. Focus on what means something to you, your family, your neighborhood, your city. Ikigai helps you find your people, your tribe. These are the people that will fight alongside you tirelessly every day. This isn't a me thing. This is a we thing. We call it the community of the willing, and it's growing. You will find people who also don't agree with you, and that's okay. They'll doubt you. They don't share your ikigai. Talk to them. Value your skeptics as much as your supporters. They will force you to ask yourself the hard questions. You can learn from them. They make you better. You can read about a story with the head of the Tea Party who said to me, I will kill vertical harvest. And I said to him, hey, let's go to lunch. After 6 months of going to lunch, painful as it was, he turned into our biggest advocate. And at the end of the day, when the governor at the time, Matt Mead, said yes to us about giving us money to help us build Vertical Harvest, it was because of this skeptic that we got there. He said, I didn't believe in them, but I turned into a believer. You can too. Governor Mead called us greenhouse zealots at the time. Vision is the art of seeing what is invisible to others, but vision without execution remains just a vision. Vision combined with action makes a powerful reality. So to end, I want to share something that a new good friend of mine taught me. We are the ones we've been waiting for. So follow your ikigai, never veer, and keep fighting. Thank you.
I just want to say thank you to Nona and Kate and Crista for sharing these stories. We are going to have a couple of questions for them, and then we'll be asking some of the questions that we received from all of you. I have a lot of questions that I want to ask, so I'm deciding the first one. Sorry, bear with me for a second. So each of you in your own ways has had the experience of moving into the territory of something completely foreign. You know, in some case it's a geography, in some case it's an industry, in some case it's the bathroom. I'm just kidding. How did you navigate these changes? And what helped you stay the course when things have been really hard? Go for it.
I can start. Okay, so we have a tagline at Guide Architects. It's called Design and Everything, right? And architects, I think, are really just problem solvers, right? So I think that as you innovate, as you move into new things, as there's no playbook for a lot of the things that we have put together, it's really about how do you ask, you know, yourself and others, how do we get to where we want to go? And I think that's where the mission, the alignment of your team, that's what really is important. Because if you've planted your flag, you know where you want to go, there's really no problem that you can't overcome, right? You just got to figure out a different way around the obstacle in front of you. And I think if you take that one step at a time, and I think you talked about that, putting one foot in front of the other, right? You see the bolder vision or the grander vision ahead of you, but it doesn't have to be as daunting, right? And you can use problem solving, or what I call design, as a way through that.
Thanks, Nona. Sarah Kate?
I think for me, being in that environment, there are two fundamental things. The first is know thyself. Know how you show up on a good day, know how you show up on a bad day, and be able to adjust to those things. And also rely on other people. The family that I lived with had a 6-year-old, and our shared vocabulary was maybe 7 words, but through facial expressions, through pointing, through miming, in many ways, Sifa was my guide in Tanzania, and being able to articulate, like, I don't understand where I'm supposed to get water, and being able to ask for help when you need it.
I also think that there's a difference between something being hard and something being wrong. And learning that difference was really important to me, because going into a new space, innovating, is hard. It's supposed to be. But then there were times where things weren't just hard, but I was maybe doing them incorrectly, or my timing was bad, or whatever it was. And I had to remove my ego from making that decision and say, okay, is this hard because it's new? Or should I pull back from this? And should I pause, or put it on the shelf, or leave it alone and let somebody else do it? And I think it was always asking myself that question of, is this something I should stick with and figure out and kind of grind through, or should I take a breath and gain perspective? And I think for me, as the last 10 years have gone on, I've gotten better at deciphering between the two, and deciphering a lot faster. Before, I was just punching away at everything and wasting a lot of time. But yeah, just asking that question and trying to figure out, is it hard because it's hard, or is it hard because it's not right?
Thanks, Crista. I'll ask one more of our questions, and then we're going to take some questions from the audience. So, Crista, you in particular talked about the importance of saying yes to things, and then seeing how things would evolve. And I'm curious for each of you, at what point did you, or will you, or do you determine that you can no longer say yes, even if you want to? And what are your criteria for taking on even more than you're already doing?
I'll start with that. If you remember my slide with the pie chart, it's something that I think about on a daily basis of, I lead a full and rich life, and that's by design. That's a choice. And for anyone that knows me, I'm always tired. I have a lot on my plate, and yet I choose that. And for me, it's a matter of reevaluating, does how I spend my time reflect my values? And if the answer is yes, then I'm okay being tired. If the answer is no, something needs to shift.
I couldn't agree with that more. I was actually thinking about your slide and that pie chart and all of that when you were talking, because all of that really resonates with me, and I bet with people who know me. And if anyone has a cattle prod for when I should say no, I'd really appreciate one of those. But I think one of my really good friends shared with me a TED Talk that she had recently listened to about happiness, that happiness is often comprised of three things. It's playfulness, flow, and connection. And when I think about what brings me happiness or joy, which I think is often, are you happy? What makes you happy? Do what you want and what makes you happy. When I think about those three things, and I think about the parts of my life, does it check those boxes? Then it's a yes. And luckily, I've designed my life that I get more yeses than nos, which means I'm often tired, but I'm also often really happy.
Oh, this is such a good question. Anybody that knows me out here knows that it's very hard for me to say no.
I think that there's a common theme there.
But I've learned, especially as we're moving on to do bigger things, that yes, I was often fueled by happiness, connection, and flow. That still fuels me. But what is alignment? And that's, we make everybody choose a word for the year, and it's my word for this year. And how is it aligning with the strategy, with the vision, right? And is it going to get us where we want to go faster, right? And responsibly, because we have a lot of people that we're bringing with us, right? But it's the people and the empowerment of the people and the team's resonance and alignment, I think, that allows us to make those decisions, right? I can tell, and we were talking earlier about Zoom and what it's done for us, I can read a Zoom room really well, right? And if I see like half the faces kind of looking at me cockeyed, I'm like, okay, maybe we put this one on the shelf, right? Because that connection and flow is not there, right? And I think that it's about people, it's about understanding your alignment to the larger vision again. I mean, it's much the same of my last answer. And making sure that the impact that you foresee, that it contributes to that. Because if it's not contributing to the impact that you want in the world, then it's probably not worth your time. And I'm sure all of you have found that your most valuable resource is your time, which is probably why we all find ourselves being tired, right? So how do you make those decisions strategically, and how do you prioritize? And that's been a lifelong challenge for me. I feel like I'm kind of getting good at it, but it's not always a learning process.
Thanks, Nona. I'm going to turn to the questions from our audience. If you just give me a moment, like I said, this is a little bit of a new system and experiment with for us. And I want to just thank Womentum superstar Sam Sema for helping curate these questions. Yes, she's amazing. So a question for everyone. What challenges have you faced as a woman in your industry?
I'll take a stab. I'd say, so I've spent a lot of time in the space of youth as well, and being a young person. So not only was I a woman, but I was a young woman, and which wasn't necessarily valued. And I kind of spoke about the idea of tokenism, and always was looked in the eye and said, we really value having youth voices and your voice and want you a part of this. Can you volunteer your time? And everyone constantly wants you to volunteer your time, and really put it on this idea of it's a really good resume builder. Guess what? My resume doesn't, that piece of paper doesn't pay my bills. And so but I've noticed in the last couple of years how that has really shifted my valuation of myself and my worth. And that on top of being a woman and often receiving like less offers of that, it's taken me a long time until this day to kind of grow out of being looked at as less than, or that my experience or my voice or my knowledge, my vision wasn't worth a paycheck. That on top of being sexually harassed at every single environmental conference that I joined at, but that's a different story. We won't go there.
Yeah. I'll speak specifically about my time in Tanzania, and that there was an interesting thing that happened, that being a woman prevented me from being welcome at certain tables. However, being an American opened a lot of doors for me. And that was a place that felt very uncomfortable, to be a white American in a setting where I was handed this privilege that was unearned, and granted audiences with people in power that local leaders would not have been granted. And so it was this place of really trying to balance that unearned privilege with an enormous amount of responsibility that came with it. And it was very uncomfortable for me. And so being in settings, I'm thinking about a meeting with a chief in a local village that otherwise would not have met with a woman, but I happened to be American and happened to be white, and in that way was granted that audience. And so just, wrestling with that. And everyone that I interacted knew that I was there as an advocate for girls' access to education. So as the only white person in probably a 500-mile square radius, I think if people had not been interested in what I had to say, it was easy to avoid me. I was the only white person. So my circumstance is a little different there.
I have so much to say about this. There's been such an impact on my life, but I wouldn't trade it for the world, being a woman. I think that, it's kind of the way I started my talk, right? The vulnerability of saying I didn't set out to be a vertical farmer, right? What that means. I mean, I am a vertical farmer. I'm participating in an industry that is driven and led by white men who are raising incredible amounts of money. But when I talked about the 4 different environmental, social, public health, economic resiliency issues, those men are only focusing on a quarter of it. They're only talking about the environmental aspect of what we do, right? And I believe that as a woman and the team that we've created, and lots of men too that are part of this journey, understand that in order for indoor growing to actually mean something, it's gotta mean something to you. And it's gotta mean something to people. And I think that's what my voice brings to the table. And what it's mistaken for isn't that nice? They're focused on social issues. That can't be profitable. And what I tell them, and my voice has become much stronger in the last 2 years about this, especially in the last year, it is we will be profitable because of the way we look at this industry. And by the way, you're gonna miss the boat. And it might be too late for you to change. And now people, when I go to conferences, are like, how do you keep your employees? Like, how do you get employees? I'm like, well, why don't you build a culture that people want to be a part of, right? And so that's a very distinct voice within entrepreneurship, within industry. We've seen some of the big, companies that are involved in tech implode, right? We've all heard those stories. And I think it's this, the lack of female voices at the top, right? But that's changing. But unfortunately, I just read something yesterday that because of, our rights being taken away, because of the way that we're looked at in this country that leads so much in terms of economic development, we're now set back to it taking 300 years before women are valued equal to men, right? This is from the UN, I think the head of the UN is where I read this. That's not in our lifetimes, right, that we're going to be able to make that up. I don't have the patience for that. So I'm starting to get a little, just like, how do we work together? And that's why groups like this are so incredibly important, because we need to support each other. I had the privilege of being able to be a part of a conference at the UN last year. It was the privilege of my life, being as an architect, going to that bastion of connection and flow and humanity and amazing architecture. It's hard. We left and then all the energy was gone. How do we keep that energy up? How do we keep supporting each other? How do we keep exchanging ideas? We need to do it. We need to accelerate that. Nobody has the patience for 300 years worth of inequity.
So a question for Crista. You spoke so much about young adults, working with young adults, being a young adult. Did you ever feel like because of your age you couldn't achieve what you wanted? And how did you overcome that?
No, I actually think the opposite. I often felt too old to achieve what I wanted. That, like, even to this day, they're like passing along the work. I kind of wish that I was 26 years old again and could go back and do it again with all the knowledge that I have now. I think, though, that as I kind of said, like, it was really interesting to be talking with people who had been in the field for 40, 50, 60 years, and hearing, coming at it with very bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, very green in a lot of these conversations, especially around the environment, talking to some incredible conservation leaders of our lifetime. And I saw young people who I was working with doing the same thing, and we were often told, like, we tried that already. That doesn't work. And it was interesting, and this was actually the basis of the mentorship program, where we didn't want to create a partnership where it was like a mentor and a mentee, and so it was top down. The mentor gets to teach the mentee stuff. It was really built on this intergenerational learning, and it was a very big piece where every mentor got told that you will not be a part of this program if you think that this is just top down. You are here to learn as much as you are to teach. And we told every mentee a part of it, saying you are here to teach as much as you are to learn. And so it was really this generational exchange. And what the feedback was actually from a lot of the mentors, saying that it was the most influential experience of their lives. And most of them were 50, 60, 70 years old, who were getting a new look at how they were approaching problems that they've been working on for years. It was like an injection of energy back into their work, and that they learned a lot about how the next generation is having to view a lot of these problems from birth, right? Like, a lot of even teenagers right now have grown up exposed to a lot of these environmental challenges. And so at first it was this idea of, like, oh my God, what are we doing? Everyone's kind of telling us that this isn't working. And then as I learned how to maybe remarket everything and open up the conversation versus it being us versus them, but actually having those conversations with people who don't always agree with you or don't always see eye to eye, and actually creating space for that conversation to happen, that's where, like, the magic started happening. And so that's where it sort of felt like, oh no, like, we could totally do this. I actually just wish I had more time. I wish I had 300 years to do it.
No, you don't.
No, I'm too tired for that.
You all have texted in so many questions, so we're going to make time for one more that could be directed at all three of you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, one of the questions that I have is actually that question. I saw Nona and Kate nodding vigorously about your comment that you ran into so many people who said, oh, we tried that already. And Nona, when you and I spoke, we talked about this idea of skeptics, and when you shared about the gentleman who you had lunch with for 6 months. So when you have faced that wall, or that person, or that different culture, or whatever it has been, we talked a lot about the hard things and getting through that, but what about someone saying, like, your voice doesn't matter? Like, we've already tried that.
I mean, I don't think that period in my life has ended, right? I think that sometimes people don't see the power of what you're doing because it is so new. It is so, they don't look past the first layer, right? So one of the biggest problems that we have is telling our story within the context of others who are looking at it just through a technology lens, right? And we're saying, no, we're looking at it as through an architecture lens, and we're looking at it through a people lens, most importantly. And people just have a hard time, looking through what they know. And what we found is that you could tell the story until you're blue in the face, until you come to the farm and see it for yourself, and really experience the passion and the joy and the culture and the technology and the food and all of the things and. That's when people say, oh no, we haven't done this before, right? Oh, we haven't seen this before. And we were talking about it earlier. It's this human, it's a human connection. And as you scale, how do you replicate that? How do you make sure that that authenticity is there? And that's one of the hardest things to do when you deal with the issue of scaling. But I think it has to be about how do you not only tell your story, how do you feel your story, how do you experience your story? And then people can't really use that easy excuse anymore.
Thank you.
My response has a similar thread that I think the first part is about connection and building relationships, and that if you're trying to understand where someone else is coming from, getting to know them as a person, we have more in common than there are differences. And so building that relationship, and I am an educator at heart, and so the second piece of that would be teaching and learning together, approaching that conflict with a sense of curiosity as to where is that person coming from? How can I learn from their perspective? Maybe they are going to poke holes in the plan that I have, and maybe that's going to make my plan even better. And being open to that, and being compassionate when you're sharing your side of the story as well. So for me, it's about people and it's about education.
Thanks, Kate.
Yeah.
Well, our tables are out in the lobby for a little while longer if you did not have a chance to visit with them. But I just want to give a huge round of applause to our panelists, Nona and Kate and Crista.
Well done.
And to all of you, thanks for spending the evening with us. We really appreciate it and hope to see you soon.